Yeah, I wanted to go down the rankings, and I want you guys to be interactive. Rankings of current head coaching positions that are open right now. I'll give you my rankings first, and then I'll tell you who I think is a good fit. So first, I want to give you the rankings. I think the Bears, when you look at the jobs that are available, because New England's no longer available, I think the Bears is the number one job available right now. You're going to say no?
Or you just keep go through it, but I got reasons. But
speak on
Bears. Then I'm going to say 2 for the Jaguars, 3 the Cowboys, 4 the Jets, 5 the Raiders, and 6 the Saints. You guys tell me your ranking, and then I'll go into why I picked the Bears first overall.
Okay. It is tough, but I do still think organizational support matters. And nothing I've seen from the Bears to date makes me think they're going to change their stripes in terms of how they structure contracts, how they, the fact they play in freaking one of the smallest stadium in the NFL. Like, there's so many issues to the Bears right now that
mighty.
They got the talent. From a talent perspective, like, if you're ranking rosters, I'm not going to disagree with this. I think that's a talent cap, but I do still think where you're at matters. So I would still put. And then I'm not like putting the Jags in that situation.
I thought I was about to say, are you going to put the Jags up there?
I would put the Cowboys above them, but I just don't think any of these jobs. I thought it was Pats was the clear one.
Yeah, for sure.
And obviously that one's filled. Now after that, I think Cowboys will still give you the tools you want if you are a great head coach to succeed. I don't know if that's for sure with the Bears, Jags, Jets. Raiders at this point either, and then the Saints they're just in such a shitty cap situation.
That's why I got them last.
So I'd probably just bump the Cowboys above the Bears, and I think the Jags just slightly above the Bears. And I'd put the Jets actually above the Bears too, just because the talent there is also young.
Yeah, they got.
It's all
they don't have the trigger guy though.
It's all rookie deals.
Let me tell you
they
what.
Don't have the.
Let me tell you what, Mike. I'm going to start with 6, and it is the Saints.
6 is
because of the minus 78 million cap space. Yeah. Okay, and we've talked about their terrible contract management there
for sure.
5, I think I agree with you here on the Raiders because there's been so much in and out the door there, but the Tom Brady ownership piece makes things really interesting. I'm going to keep them at 5 though, because they have to prove it to me first. I agree with the Jets being number 4. Because of the fact that there has been so much uncertainty there, the quarterback question marks, and that media, the fan base, the media. I work in New York every weekend. I understand how insane these people can be, and rightfully so. It's been shitty since Rex Ryan left.
For sure.
And then this is where it gets interesting. I'm going to go Jags at 3 because Trent Baalke is still employed.
Dude,
plain and simple, huh?
Right. If Trent Baalke wasn't employed, I would imagine Ben Johnson will be signed already, like
legally wouldn't be
pre-signed.
Yeah.
What is it?
What a handshake,
verbal commitment. It would be. I'll be there. I'll talk to you in a month and a half after we go to New Orleans.
See you in a month.
So I've got the Jaguars there. I mean, you got the quarterback, you've got the owner that doesn't meddle. I think Ben Johnson would really appreciate that. He would have a direct line of communication with him, get things as he wants. Number 2 would be the Dallas Cowboys. And I just think that regardless of what the roster situation is, regardless of the cap space, it's the Dallas Cowboys. And if I was a head coach and a prospective head coach, I would want badly to be the Dallas head coach. I just know it comes along with that. Number 1, obviously, the Chicago Bears. And I think that, to Mike's point about them not changing their stripes, I've listened to a few cut-ups of George McCaskey giving firing and hiring presentations. Have you seen this where it's like a minute and a half long of George McCaskey saying the same thing every time? Very respectful to the fans. We understand your frustration. 6 times since Lovie Smith got fired.
Correct.
Lovie Smith, Mark Trestman, John Fox, Matt Nagy, Matt Eberflus, and now we're on to the next one. But here's the thing. I think Virginia McCaskey turned 103 2 weeks ago.
Wow, that's a blessing.
It's a blessing. She's an incredible woman and has been around the Bears her entire life. I think that at this point now, George understands that his mother, being 103, isn't going to have many more of these hiring and firing cycles. And he's going to just eventually put his hands up and say, Jesus, take the wheel, as it were, as it pertains to his staff. So I think that Ryan Poles, Ian Yates-Cunningham, and if Ian Yates-Cunningham leaves, then he's not going to be part of it. But Ryan Poles will have the green light to do exactly what he wants. I think that with this new head coach hiring, whoever it is, if it's the guy right here on the screen, which I think would actually be cool. I made a couple memes this week about Mike McCarthy eating Chicago hot dogs. He'd be right at home. He'd be sponsored by Illuminati's tonight, by the way. This is a guy with a ton of experience. Yeah. This is a guy with a Super Bowl. This is a guy who works well with quarterbacks. This is a guy that even at the end of the year with injuries across the board to his team, they still showed up and competed. The star of his team, Micah Parsons, sung his praises and talked about wanting to go out there and compete for the coach. I think it could be a home run. And he's old school, and he's a Yinzer. I think Mike Ditka was also a Yinzer. So there's a special place in Chicago fans' hearts about these Pittsburgh natives that come in. They're just tough SOBs. And I love Mike McCarthy. He's got the perfect build for that Arctic climate in the wintertime.
He'll stay warm.
Yeah. He's got a street named after him in Green Bay. They can't do that. He can't do
that. Mike, we talked about this the other day. I guess all of us are simpatico thinking that he's the perfect fit for the Chicago Bears. When you just look at it, you name some of his accolades, right? Has a pedigree of really developing young quarterbacks. We saw with Aaron Rodgers, and he had to make a difficult decision when he was in Green Bay because Brett Favre decided to come out of retirement, but he decided, we're going to ride with Aaron Rodgers, continue to, develop him and make him the quarterback in the future. And look, that worked out. In Green Bay, they freaking won a Super Bowl there.
Who does Caleb model his game after?
Aaron Rodgers. Let's go back to when he decided to take over the play calling duties in Dallas. Remember, Kellen Moore was there. They had a top 5 offense.
Yep.
Well, when Mike McCarthy took over, they had the number 1 offense in football. And for most of that season, Dak Prescott was the front runner for MVP. And he had his best statistical year all year long. So this is why I think it's baffling to a lot of us that Jerry Jones didn't work this out with Mike McCarthy. But if you're Chicago, he's the perfect candidate for you, right? And you have $82 million in cap space, and you have a top 10 pick. So why not get a guy that has championship experience who can develop young quarterbacks, and quarterbacks have had their best years under his tutelage? Just makes more sense for the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams to have Mike McCarthy as head coach.
To put more context as to why I said the Bears is not the number 1 job, and what I think gets vastly underreported in an aspect of how Chicago does business that I think really puts them behind the 8 ball, really hampers them in terms of competing in the NFL and really competing for Super Bowls. They match money to year every single big deal they sign, which means if it's a 4-year, $100 million deal, a guy's cap hit will be $25 million every single year of that deal.
Feels elementary.
You got to move that money around.
They do not, and it's because I think the McCaskey family does not have the cash flows that other
owners have.
So they have to have the money go in that year. They don't give out big signing bonuses, and they don't put funny years on the back end to push money down the line. And when you're doing that, matching money to year every single time, you are. Yes, maybe you make up for it on the back end of deals where you don't have these big backloaded contracts, but a lot of teams give themselves outs at the end of
Correct, yeah.
And so they're eating a lot of cap hits early on in these deals where you look at most big contracts, like the Jordan Love deal, his cap hits the next couple of years are going to be like 30 million.
They're low, yeah.
Million. And then he has a void year at the back end where it's another 30 million, but the cap's going to go up by 30 million by then.
Correct.
And so if you're only doing that every single contract you sign, you're basically always kind of front loading deals instead of back loading. And that works if the cap stays stable year on year on year. But if the cap's going up, and it's gone up every year except for COVID, then if the cap's going up, you are basically hurting yourself in the short run to maybe save in the long run, to maybe have a cheaper deal at the end of it. But also a lot of times guys don't live up to it by the end of their contracts. And so
I hope George and the guys are listening.
But that's the biggest thing that doesn't really get talked about. Because again, not a lot of people dig deep into the cap. But if you're doing that with every single big contract, they did it with DJ Moore, they did it with Jalen Johnson, they did it with Montez Sweat, you are hurting yourself in the short run and not making yourself as competitive in the short run, unfortunately. So
let's go to my number 2 team. And I had the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I paired them with Ben Johnson. I just think Trevor Lawrence has gone through multiple coaches, right? Urban Meyer, Doug Peterson. They still haven't been able to get that talent that everybody's expecting, right? Trevor Lawrence essentially got paid because of what people think he will be. right? Potential is a dangerous word in the NFL because a lot of times dudes get paid off of potential. My thing is, when is he going to realize that potential? And if there's any guy out there, I think that could maybe squeeze that talent out of him, it's Ben Johnson. I mean, he literally resurrected Jared Goff's career. Now, Goff was a good quarterback when he was with the Rams, but McVay thought they could get a little bit better there, and it ultimately worked. They won a Super Bowl, but it's also worked for the Detroit Lions as well, right? When you see what Jared Goff has done, he's constantly been a top 5 MVP candidate.
And all the players they got from that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Trevor Lawrence, Ben Johnson makes a lot of sense, and they have the 5th overall pick. But to Kyle's point, what is going to happen with the GM? Trent Baalke, and I think that's something that needs to be discussed. And it seems like Shad Khan, we talked about this interview, him and Baalke being on there at the same time, and the reporter asked, so what if the head coach comes in and says, maybe we need to change some things up personnel-wise? He was like, well, if he actually has the information and it makes a lot of sense, something that we're gonna actually visit and look at. And the dude next to you is saying, oh, so I'm out the door if the coach doesn't want me here?
2 bucks, and he's
like,
just,
so it's just like, my thing, sometimes I feel like owners should just rip the whole Band-Aid off, right? Start anew. It'll be interesting because I do believe Ben Johnson ultimately ends up with the Jacksonville Jaguars.
I agree, though, with those two. It's where you get to the Cowboys here that it gets a little.
Yeah, you like it. It gets a little crazy, right?
I saw that.
Let's get to the next one. Cowboys. We talked about Dion earlier being potentially a head coach. There was a report, Jason Witten, that Jerry Jones potentially maybe wanted him to be a head coach.
Pretend I didn't hear that.
I'm going to go out of way left field here. And I think this one actually makes the most sense. People have talked about Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, maybe the message getting stale. And you know this, Kyle, when it's been the same voice for 18 years, is it resonating with the team still, right? And I think Mike Tomlin's a hell of a coach. I think he's been a detriment to himself because he's overachieved with the current rosters that he's had over these last couple of years. When you have inept quarterback play and you still win 9 and 10 games, that proves you're a hell of a coach.
Yeah.
My thing is, Jerry Jones makes these flashy moves. Trade for Mike Tomlin. Sometimes going to a new place, get a new voice. He's a guy that's going to get the best out of those players. He's a no-nonsense guy. He's real relatable. And is there any guy that can motivate his players more than Mike Tomlin? I think it just makes too much sense for Jerry to trade for Mike Tomlin. Now, again, I don't know if Pittsburgh and the Rooney family would be willing to do this, but I think it would make a lot of sense.
Would he wear all white on the sideline, or would he go?
You know, he'd be crisp on the sideline.
All white with the blue star.
Remember when he used to have the fresh fade when he had the high top?
Mike Tomlin,
you know the shades are going to be on even indoor.
It's going to be an even more Hall of Fame look as a Dallas head coach than the Pittsburgh Steelers head coach.
So Sean Payton got traded, obviously from New Orleans to Denver, but that was more of. He wasn't obviously the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. He was out of the NFL already, but they still had his rights. That was a first and a second. The Saints sent back a third. So that was compensation for that. Herm Edwards was the last active head coach to actually get traded. That was in 2006. That was the Jets trading him to the Chiefs. That was for a 4th round pick. Where do you think, because I mean, Steelers fans would legitimately be happy with them just like cutting Tomlin outright. But I do think, again, they could get trade return. They'd be silly, in my opinion, to just let him walk because he would be the hottest candidate on the open market once they did.
That's what I'm saying. So it just depends on.
So I wonder what compensation would be.
Yeah, so I'm thinking like maybe a second or third.
Yeah, I think a second's fair.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what it is.
Make it happen, Jerry.
But Jonathan
Who would Pittsburgh hire after that is the
Jonathan
question.
Jones said they don't do
Mike McCarthy.
Matt Nagy.
Honestly, McCarthy there would be. He's from Pittsburgh. That would be.
Matt Nagy back with Justin
quarterback situation. If I'm him, I'm taking Chicago for sure.
True.
Nagy with Fields.
Yeah, let's go to the number 4 team. I have the Jets as the number 4 team. I think Aaron Glenn just makes too much sense.
Yep, I said
got a first round pick for the Jets, 2-time Pro Bowler there. When you walk in the building, he's got a big picture there. I think it would mean something to him. I think that's what me speaking as a Jet, we need. Somebody that it means something to. I think Rex Ryan was the last guy where it was that type of feeling, right? And I love Todd Bowles. Robert Saleh is my guy. I love him as well. I just think having a guy that wore the green and white and it means something to would make too much sense. I go back to the Hard Knocks. I think it was 2 years ago when the Lions were on there. And when Dan Campbell had Aaron Glenn speak in front of the entire team in front office, I've never seen a meeting room more locked in for a coach speaking, which means he demands that respect in that room. Players respect him. People in the front office
you can
respect
hear a pin
him.
drop in there.
Correct. Everybody was tuned in and locked in. I think that's something the Jets need. They do have the 7th overall pick. Question is Aaron Rodgers going to be part of the team or not? I would lean towards him probably most likely not being part of the future there, him and Devontae. But I think Aaron Glenn makes the most sense.
But you got a full cupboard on D, right? Yeah. If you're just like objectively looking at these teams and like, where can I have the most success on the defense side of the ball, my side of the ball?
It's the Jets without a doubt.
It's insane. So, yeah, 100% agree.
All right, let's go to the next job. And this one's interesting, right? The Las Vegas Raiders. There was rumors, because Tom Brady's a minority owner, that maybe potentially he wanted Vrabel to come there, or he's trying to get Ben Johnson. And again, if you're Ben Johnson, you're probably the top guy on the totem pole. And you look at the Raiders, you're like, who's my quarterback? Yes, we have a ton of cap space, but our owner's been kind of funny with the money, right? So it's just like you have $112 million in cap space. You have the 6th overall pick. So you could essentially flip this roster over quickly, but then you're also looking at the division. 3 of those teams in the division, besides us, made the playoffs this last year. So I actually have Liam Cohen going there from the Bucs, right? This is a guy that has worked his way up. When he was offensive coordinator at Kentucky, Will Levis had his best year there. When he went to the Rams, he learned under Sean McVay. Now we see what Baker Mayfield is doing this year with the Tampa Bay Bucs. It'll be interesting to see, do they try to get aggressive in the draft and try to potentially move up from the number 6 spot? I just don't see Tennessee or Cleveland taking calls because they need quarterbacks in the worst way, unless they're just not in love with any other 2 guys. So essentially going to have a bridge quarterback. Now, is that Sam Darnold? Is that Daniel Jones? Like, who is that? Is it Russell Wilson? I think Liam Cohen can steer the ship until they find their quarterback of the future. And I think he'll be a guy that they'll probably lock into a 6-year deal, and he'll probably demand that just so I know I have the comfortability of being here for at least 3 or 4 years to build this the right way.
I'll say this about Liam Cohen, and we've talked about it a lot this year. I love the way that he was able to change the flavor of that offense at the drop of a hat, with injuries to Godwin, with Mike Evans out of the roster or lineup on numerous occasions this year, getting the running backs involved in the passing game. Granted, Bucky Irving was fantastic. They hit a home run with their draft pick on the at center. And obviously Tristan Wirfs is a man-eater out there at tackle, but even the running game changed as a result of what worked and what wasn't working at an optimal level. And they were pointing that out on the broadcast this past game against the Commanders. And it stuck out to me because oftentimes when I think about these offensive coaches, I don't think about the run game. And sometimes these run games, they don't change. They just are beating their head against the wall the entire year. He's a guy that changed with the times, and I think as long as you get a better quarterback than what they have in Vegas, that team will make big-time jumps.
One thing I will say, because we talked about this earlier, a lot of people don't know this, but we're nerds and we watch a lot of tape. This Raiders offensive line is actually pretty good.
Yeah,
when you talk about it, I think the thing that Liam Cohen really did it was kind of like the Tampa Bay Bucs O-line, very young, aggressive at the line of scrimmage. I think he can be very inventive in how he has different blocking schemes to support that run game with the Raiders. So I think there's a little bit of comparisons when you talk about the 2 O-lines, Bucs and the Raiders as well.
Yeah, I think the more I think about the Raiders job, more I'm like, it might not be that bad, especially since they're going to have to give you a long leash, right? They're going to have to give you like 6-year deal
minimum.
But you basically get to make this roster in your own image. You have enough cap space to do it. You have a high enough draft pick. Yeah, you don't have a quarterback, but you have a good O-line. And so, and that's a young O-line. So it's cupboards bare. It's the barest of cupboards of all these teams.
You got Brock.
But you have the space to make it work, and you have an O-line.
Brock Bowers.
Oh, yeah.
So there's
going to be okay.
Yeah.
Just give him the ball.
It's like a high school football team. Just throw it to Brock.
You're starting like an expansion franchise, basically.
Pretty much.
Is there income tax in Nevada?
No income tax.
I was like, he's going to get all that bread, too.
We always lead with that with Florida.
we should lead
with the Vegas guys.
100%. And the last and final job, Saints, and I think Mike's talked about this till we've been blue in the face. Worst cap situation, minus $78 million in cap space already. And then when you look at some of the contracts they're under, they're just bad. We've been saying this for years. It's time for them to stop kicking the can down the road and just take the hit this year, be bad, and get from up under these contracts. I think Brian Flores makes a lot of sense just because when you go back to when he was in Miami, it was kind of similar to how this roster for the Saints is in regards to the players and them actually being in certain cap situations. Brian Flores was trying to get it from up under some of those bad contracts. And he had these guys competitive, for 2 years in a row. So I think this is a scenario he could go there, build it up from square one. My thing is, if I'm a head coach coming in, I'm talking to the owner, like, we got to get it from up under these contracts. So you're not really giving me a chance to win games. Like, I know you guys think we can go 8-9 or 9-8, but that doesn't get you to the playoffs anymore. We need to stop kicking the can down the road, get from up under some of these contracts. I know a lot of these frontline guys are mainstays in New Orleans, but it's time to move on and build this thing the right way.
You know who we never talk about, who's definitely not going to be quarterbacking somewhere? Derek Carr is going to be a quarterback somewhere else. They're going to trade Derek Carr, or they're going to cut him. He is not going to be a New Orleans Saint. I would be so surprised if he's a New Orleans Saint. So I bet he's like, whether it's the Giants, not the Raiders.
Go back to the Raiders?
He's not going to go back to the Raiders. But like, he could be Browns. He might be a guy who we really haven't talked about much.
Starter that went back to his original team.
That's a good question.
Cam Newton.
When did he go? He went back.
Remember, he went to New England, then he went back to Carolina.
I do not.
Oh yeah, and he couldn't throw it if I can stop. Well, he had a shoulder.
Yeah, well, they used him mainly as like a wildcat guy.
He was such a friggin'.
He was. I mean, that's the only one that comes to mind recently.
Yeah. I'm trying to think.
Maybe add us in the chat. Let us know.
Yeah.
All right. And you had Brian Flores going there.
Yeah. That's what I was saying, because like they're going to be cap strapped. They're going to have a lot of talent. And Brian Flores usually elevates his talent. I mean, even looking at Minnesota's team this year, a lot of people won't know the guys' names. Like Patrick Jones had a career year there. Van Ginkel was a good player, but
he got great.
Became an all-pro this year.
DPOY level.
Exactly. Blake Cashman was another guy. So he's been able to do more with less at different stops. I trust him in this.
Do we think we're far enough away from him, suing the NFL, that NFL owners would be willing to question? Because
if I was an owner, I'd still be like, "Hey, I think he's a great coach, but just don't forget."
That's why, like, is that going to limit his options? Because if it's limiting his options, maybe the Saints are like.
That's what I'm saying. I think that makes the most sense.
And he bullied Tua Tagovailoa.
He really did.
Like, he bullied him.
He definitely did.
They kicked Richie
Miami's got since then.
They kicked Richie out the league.
Something about Miami just lends itself to that.
Yeah.